Clara had driven for hours, hoping the back roads might bring her peace. The asphalt beneath her tires unraveled like a forgotten lullaby, fading into nothing but packed dirt and creeping vines. Her fingers trembled lightly on the steering wheel, not from cold, but from the weight of a silence that stretched far too deep into her thoughts. She wasn't running from something specific, just the accumulation of years, of quiet disappointments and voices that never really heard her. When the mist rolled in thick and white, and the GPS blinked out in protest, she didn't panic. She welcomed the unknown. It felt familiar. A faded sign, almost invisible beneath a shroud of ivy, caught her attention. It was more of a suggestion than a direction, etched into rusted iron and dangling like an afterthought. Ashvale Hollow. Her breath hitched, not from recognition, but from a strange pull in her chest, as if her soul remembered something her mind could not. Without understanding why, she turned the wheel, the tires crunching gravel as she followed the winding path deeper into the forest. Trees arched over her like cathedral spires, blotting out the sky, until only twilight remained. That's when she saw it, half shrouded in fog and shadow. A mansion that loomed like it had been waiting. The structure rose from the earth as though grown from the bones of the forest, tall and solemn, with windows like eyes that had long forgotten how to blink. The mansion exuded an air of patience, as though it had endured centuries, merely to greet her arrival. Cowrie stepped from the car, her boots sinking slightly into the damp moss that blanketed the path. The silence here wasn't absence. It was full, humming with things unspoken. A single raven watched her from a dying branch above, its wings tucked, its presence unmoving. She looked up, and it blinked slowly, knowingly. There was no logic in her decision to walk toward the door. No map, no invitation. Just the growing certainty that she needed to be here. As her hand reached out to touch the ancient knocker, a lion's head warped by rust, she hesitated, not from fear but from awe. The wood was cold beneath her palm, pulsing faintly, like the echo of a heartbeat buried in oak. She pushed, and the door groaned open with a sigh that seemed centuries old. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of weak light, and the air smelled of old paper, smoke, and forgotten tears. This was not a place people found. It was a place that found them. The entrance hall greeted her with a long rug bleached by time, and chandeliers hung precariously above, like skeletal remnants of forgotten grandeur. The walls were lined with portraits of stern men and sorrowful women, their painted eyes glossed over with age. Yet Clara felt those eyes follow her, not with judgment, but with mourning, as though they recognized in her the same broken rhythm they had once lived by. She moved forward, her footsteps muffled, guided not by direction, but by instinct. A thread in her mind tugged her deeper into the mansion's heart. In the great parlor, the air changed. It thickened, as if memories clung to it, refusing to fade. A grand piano rested in the corner, its lid open, its keys yellowed and cracked. Someone had played it once, many someones perhaps. But now it stood silent, its music trapped in the wood. She approached it, brushing her fingers across the keys. No sound emerged, not even a whisper. She sat on the bench, and in that moment, she felt time slip sideways. For just a breath, she wasn't alone. She turned, but there was nothing behind her, only the weight of something unseen. She explored slowly, each room unfolding like a page in a diary, written by hands that no longer existed. Dust covered every surface like a veil, and cobwebs clung to chandeliers like tattered lace. Yet nothing decayed beyond a certain point, frozen in a half-life, untouched by rot or ruin. In one room, she found a library, its shelves sagging under the burden of leather-bound books. Many had no titles, only symbols etched into their spines. She touched one, and the room seemed to exhale. A slow, invisible shift in the air, like something stirring in sleep. The book she had touched fell open, revealing a hand-drawn map, not of the forest nor the mansion as she knew it, but of something beneath. Narrow corridors, winding endlessly, labeled only in archaic script. Silentum transitus. The silent passage. Her finger hovered over the parchment, drawn to a symbol that resembled an eye eclipsed by a crescent moon. A shiver passed down her spine. She looked up, and the library had changed. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, and a mirror that had once reflected only her now revealed a corridor behind her, one that did not exist a moment ago. Kaori turned toward the space where the corridor had appeared in the mirror. The bookshelf stood solid, unmoving, but something in her knew it wasn't real. She pressed her hands against the wood, and with the gentlest push, it gave way. A hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway cloaked in darkness and damp. She hesitated only briefly. She had always run from the unknown, from the ache of memories better left untouched. But not now. Now the only way was forward. She stepped through, and the wall sealed itself behind her, as though it had never opened. The silent passage was nothing like the rest of the mansion. It breathed. She could hear it, a slow inhale and exhale, echoing softly through the stone. The walls were etched with symbols that shimmered faintly in the low light, and the floor beneath her feet vibrated with a pulse that was not hers. As she moved deeper, the air grew colder, but not with natural chill. This was the cold of something watching, something ancient. The corridor twisted endlessly, leading her through chambers forgotten by time. Each held remnants of lives once lived. Shoes neatly placed by a door, a child's toy, a faded letter still folded. The deeper Kaori walked, the more the passage began to whisper, not in words she could understand, but in fragmented syllables and weeping sighs that echoed softly from the walls. The sound was like wind through a broken flute, low, hollow, and mournful. She passed by alcoves carved into stone, some holding rusted relics, others empty save for the thick silence. With every step, the notion grew that this place was not made for the living, and yet it remembered life with painful clarity. She found a narrow stairway spiraling downward, lit by a strange glow from sconces that bore no fire. Their light was bluish, spectral, casting long shadows that flickered despite her stillness. She descended slowly, her breath visible now in the frigid air. Halfway down she paused. A portrait hung halfway along the wall, tattered and water-stained. It was of a woman with Kaori's eyes. The resemblance chilled her more than the air ever could. The woman's expression was one of deep sorrow and warning. At the base of the stairs, she emerged into a chamber lined with mirrors, each one fractured slightly differently, each reflecting not only her image, but variations of it. Some reflections stood still as she moved, others turned away or covered their eyes. Her throat tightened. She stepped cautiously between them, trying not to meet their gazes. One mirror cracked as she passed, a long fracture crawling across the glass like a slow scream. Something behind her reflection moved, something she couldn't see when she turned around. The corridor beyond the mirror room narrowed again, leading to a door of blackened wood, bound by iron. An inscription above it read, Veritas Lacerata Torn Truth. Kaori's fingers trembled as she pushed it open. Inside was a room lit by a single swaying lantern. The floor was covered in chalk-drawn circles, symbols she recognized from the book in the library. This was where the rituals had taken place. She felt it in her bones. The space held a residue of sorrow that weighed on her shoulders like a shroud. In the center of the room was a stone table, and upon it rested a small journal, its leather cover curled at the edges. Kaori opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was delicate, almost hesitant. It spoke of a group who had come seeking to preserve memory by unlocking doors between worlds. What began as devotion had turned to desperation as they discovered the cost. Those who passed through the silent passage did not return the same. Some never returned at all. Others came back hollow. One entry stood out. It was addressed to the one who hears the house breathe. Kaori's pulse quickened. The writer spoke of being chosen by the house, not welcomed, but claimed. It knows your grief, the entry read. It will use it to open the final gate. Kaori closed the journal, her fingers aching as though they had absorbed the sorrow within the pages. Her own grief, her quiet ache of years spent feeling unseen, seemed to hum in her blood now, resonating with the house like a tuning fork. She moved through a hidden panel in the ritual room, following a sound, now a distant lullaby, haunting and familiar. It was the song her mother used to hum when Kaori had night terrors as a child. But her mother had been gone for years. The melody guided her through the winding dark until she emerged into a room that was not part of this time or world. It looked like her childhood bedroom. Every detail replicated, from the fading wallpaper to the stuffed rabbit with the missing eye on the bed. Kaori stood frozen. Her knees nearly gave beneath her. The air in this room was warmer, charged with emotion. She stepped inside, and a shadow detached from the corner. It was a woman. No, not a shadow and echo. Her mother, or something wearing her mother's shape. The figure smiled, but the smile was wrung too wide, too knowing. It opened its arms, and Kaori took a trembling step forward before stopping. The eyes, they were empty, glassy pools reflecting a void. Whatever this thing was, it remembered her, but it was not her mother. I've missed you, the echo whispered, voice like velvet over shattered glass. Stay with me, just a little longer. Kaori shook her head slowly, tears burning her eyes. The thing stepped forward, and the walls of the room began to peel away, revealing a vast emptiness beyond, full of voices and eyes, a churning sea of memory and regret. The rabbit fell from the bed, and when it hit the floor, it crumbled into ash. Kaori backed away, the doorway behind her now gone. Only the passage remained, pulsing, waiting. She turned and fled down a corridor that had not been there a moment before. The echo called after her, its voice changing, becoming colder, sharper. The silent passage walked around her now, walls expanding and contracting like lungs. It showed her flashes of herself, moments of hesitation, of love lost, of kindness turned bitter with age. It knew her. It was her in a way. She was not just walking through it. She was becoming part of it. Each step further dissolved more of the person she used to be. The passage widened, revealing a rotunda of ancient stone and stained glass windows that filtered in no light. The glass was not meant to illuminate, but to obscure each pane, depicting strange scenes of hooded figures, kneeling before a spiral symbol carved into the earth. Cowrie moved slowly, drawn to the center of the chamber, where the spiral had been replicated in the floor with pieces of bone and crystal. She stared down, mesmerized. The spiral seemed to turn under her feet, though she remained still. The silence of the rotunda broke with the sound of a bell-soft distant, like a call from the end of a long tunnel. Cowrie turned in slow dread, expecting to see another reflection or illusion. But instead, she found a man standing at the threshold. He looked real, but his clothes were of another time-suit-colored coat, a scarf mottled with age. His eyes were hollowed by grief, yet something in them sparked recognition. "I thought you were her," he whispered, as if speaking to a ghost. "You wear her sorrow like a veil." Cowrie didn't speak. She didn't need to. She felt his words before he said them, like thoughts that had drifted too close. "The house, it doesn't let go," he said, eyes scanning the walls. "It feeds on remembrance. It offered me a second chance. I took it. I shouldn't have." His form flickered, like film caught in a projector's jam. "She's still in here, the one I loved. I've walked these halls for what feels like centuries. Time folds here." Kaori reached for him, but her hand passed through cold mist. He faded slowly, voice echoing into nothing. And once more, Kaori was alone. She lingered in the rotunda, her breath ragged. That brief contact had stirred something old inside her, memories she thought buried. Her father's silence after her mother's funeral, the years of going unseen, of shouting quietly into a world that had no room for her voice. The house knew. It remembered. It offered illusions of healing but wrapped them in lies. She clutched her arms around herself and moved on, not because she was brave, but because she couldn't go back. The next hallway was narrower, the ceiling lower, almost oppressive. The walls were lined with framed letters, handwritten. Ink faded. Kaori stopped to read a few, and the contents stole the breath from her lungs. They were all farewells, letters from people lost to the passage, writing to family, to lovers, to children they'd never see again. One letter was signed with her mother's name. Her hand trembled as she read it. "Kaori, my sweet, if you ever find this place, leave. It is not what it seems. Not even death will save you from it." She dropped the letter, her heart stammering as the air shifted again. This time it was not a whisper that followed, but laughter thin, childlike, but strained. It echoed from the end of the hallway. Against reason, against every scream in her instincts, Kaori moved toward the sound. It led her to a door too small for an adult to pass through comfortably. She crouched, pushing it open. Inside was a nursery, long-decayed dolls with blank eyes, cribs with mold-softened pillows, mobiles rusted into stillness. Something had lived here, something that never grew up. In the crib closest to her, a small bundle shifted. Kaori reached toward it, heart in her throat, and uncovered a broken music box. It began to play, though she had not wound it. The melody was slow and melancholy. She turned to leave, but the door was gone. The room grew colder, and the dolls' heads turned one by one, their eyes now glossy and aware. The walls bled with shadows, ink-like and shifting. Kaori stepped back, pressed against the crib, whispering to herself, just to hear something human. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The shadows crawled toward her, reaching like fingers through the dust. Then suddenly, the floor beneath her gave way. She fell, not fast, but suspended, as if gravity had forgotten her. Images flickered past her, Memories of her childhood, her first heartbreak, the quiet rage of being overlooked, ignored, dismissed. She fell through her own life, fragmented and laid bare. When she landed, it was not with pain, but with a heavy thud in a room so silent it hurt. The walls pulsed like they were breathing. She was in a stone chamber now, carved into the very roots of the house. It smelled of old clay and the salt of weeping. Symbols covered every inch of the walls. But these were different, etched by fingernails, desperate and erratic. A single lantern swung overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. At the far end of the room was a door made of black glass, and behind it something shifted. Not a creature, not a person, but a presence so vast and aware that Kari felt her thoughts start to fray just by sensing it. As she stepped toward the door, she realized the walls were not empty. Faces had been carved into the stone, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one bore an expression of anguish, as if captured in the moment of their final scream. She reached out and touched one. It was warm, alive. The face opened its eyes and whispered, "There is no way back, only through." Kaori staggered back, pulse pounding, but her feet moved forward despite her will. The house had her now, and something beyond the glass door was waiting. The black glass door loomed before her like a wound in reality, pulsing faintly with light from within. Kaori reached for the handle and found it icy, humming with some ancient energy that repelled yet drew her. When she opened it, the air changed. It thickened into something heavier than breath, a kind of atmosphere meant for things that had forgotten how to live. She stepped inside and found herself in a circular chamber lit by nothing, yet fully visible. The walls were mirrors again, but these didn't reflect her body, only her fears. Each reflection showed a version of Kari fractured by moments she had buried. The job she never fought for, the friend she pushed away, the morning she stood at her mother's grave and felt nothing but numb fatigue. These were not distortions, they were truths. And yet the versions of herself in the mirrors seemed older, thinner, more hollow. Some were whispering, others screamed silently. One simply wept, her hands bloodless and open. Kaori stepped past them, unwilling to meet their eyes for too long. But the whispers followed. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal. Upon it rested a single object, a locket, old, tarnished, yet undeniably hers. She had lost it as a child. Her mother's gift, gone without explanation. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. The moment it touched her skin, memories surged like a storm. Her mother's voice in the garden, the smell of cinnamon on winter mornings, the moment they told her she had passed, the grief she never voiced, the love she never got to give back. All of it returned in a flash that nearly brought her to her knees. The ground beneath her began to shift, breaking apart like dry earth, and the chamber collapsed inward. Not destructively, but with purpose, like a mouth closing. The mirrors cracked, and from each fragment, shadows rose, swirling into one towering form. It was formless and vast, but its eyes were unmistakable. They were hers. It spoke without sound, projecting its message straight into her bones. You came seeking peace, but peace is not what you carry. You came to forget, but forgetting is how this place grows. Kaori stood tall, though her heart trembled like glass. "Then what do you want?" she whispered aloud, her voice echoing strangely. The shadow moved closer, unfurling into a cyclone of faces and shapes, all versions of her. Moments in time, choices unmade. "To remember," it said at last, "to be whole, mansion didn't trap people with fear. It trapped them with truth. Truth too heavy to carry out into the world beyond these walls. She thought of the people she had passed, the man in the rotunda, the weeping echo of her mother, the fractured children. Each had chosen remembrance, perhaps even thinking it was redemption. But they had become part of the house instead. Cowrie stepped backward. "I won't forget, but I won't stay," she said, though she was unsure if such a choice existed. The house began to quake, reacting not with rage but sorrow. The lights dimmed, the shadows receded. The door behind her reappeared, but it pulsed as if wounded. Cowrie turned and ran, through the hallway of letters, through the broken nursery, past the fading portrait of the woman who might have been her ancestor or herself. The mansion resisted walls, shifted, stairs collapsed. But something guided her now. Not instinct, not fear, her own memory, her own will. She repeated her mother's lullaby under her breath, grounding herself in the only real thing she had left: love. The echoes screamed behind her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She wouldn't. When she burst through the entrance hall, it was no longer night. Twilight reigned, soft and grey, and the door groaned open with a finality that chilled her. Outside, the fog had lifted, just enough to reveal her car, untouched, as though no time had passed. Cowrie turned back once. The mansion stood still, patient, watching. Its windows no longer seemed like eyes, but scars. The air around it pulsed with a question she dared not answer. She climbed into her car, hands shaking, and drove. The forest let her go, trees slowly parting like mourners at the end of a funeral procession. The road uncoiled before her, real this time, solid. But something in her had changed. She was still Cowrie, but now she carried a weight that had no shape, only feeling. The mansion had taken nothing from her. It had only shown her what she already bore, and what she must choose to carry or release. Her face in the rearview mirror looked the same, but her eyes were older now. She never spoke of Ashvale Hollow again, not to friends, not in journals. The mansion existed now in a place beyond words, beyond fear. But some nights, when the wind was soft and her dreams fragile, she would hear it, the passage breathing, not to frighten her, not to call her back, but to remind her it still lived in memory, that she had walked through its heart and left something behind, not her soul, not her fear, but a truth that could not be buried, only endured. The silent passage was never meant to be escaped, only understood.